since the fiscal stabilization program was introduced by the UPP. Are we borrowing less? The answer is no. A resounding no. In fact, Madam Speaker, the UPP has incurred liabilities in the region of $1.5 billion in one term. Let me repeat that. The UPP, Madam Speaker, has incurred liabilities in the region of $1.5 billion in one term. It took the Antigua Labour Party 28 years to chalk up just over $1 billion. And I'm talking about principal here in liabilities. Obviously, the Antigua Labour Party did not pay a number of loans, and there were substantial arrears which eventually exceeded the principal amount. And I'll say here, there's some who believe that the Antigua Labour Party was responsible by not paying some of those bilateral loans. But, Madam Speaker, it was a matter of prioritizing. And let me say here too, that those very developed countries that we borrowed from, Italy, France, United Kingdom, and so on, they have an obligation to assist developing countries. They have signed a number of treaties, a number of accords, agreeing to make available up to 0.7% of their GNP for aid. And in some instances, Madam Speaker, they don't even give 1/10. And I can tell you here, it was not the intent of the Labour Party not to repay those loans. But it was right to prioritize. And I believe, too, that it was the right thing to allow them to wait for those monies. Because, Madam Speaker, they were loaning those funds on a short-term basis. And no country, no developing country, can grow on short-term funding. In fact, those very countries, some of those developed countries, when they were developing, they were given perpetual loans that they never had to repay. They just roll them over to ensure that the money stayed in the economy for development. And I believe, Madam Speaker, I don't know if it was deliberate or a stroke of luck, that what the Labour Party did by not prioritizing those payments helped this economy. And that is why the Antiguan economy invariably, year after year, outperformed the other OECS countries. In fact, if you do a trend analysis, Madam Speaker, excuse me, you do a trend analysis, you'd recognize an average that the economy of this country expands at about twice the regional average, generally speaking. So when the Honourable Member for Rural East boasts about economic growth in this country, the reality is it is the Antigua Labour Party that had set that foundation. And even the 12% that it boasted about in 2006, 2007, as a result of Cricket World Cup, I want to say here categorically that, one, the UPP was not responsible for putting the socio-economic infrastructure in place. And two, Madam Speaker, the projects, the large projects that emanated during that period, or materialized during that period, were actually emanated from under Labour. Let me just repeat that for the sake of clarity. The large projects that materialized during Cricket World Cup, Madam Speaker, emanated under the Antigua Labour Party. And let me give examples. Members say I'm in a dream world. It is well known, Madam Speaker, that the Sandal Resort project, the Grand Sandals Resort project, emanated under Labour. It is well known, Madam Speaker, that Veranda emanated under Labour. It is well known, too, that even the cricket stadium, Madam Speaker, emanated under Labour. Fact. Now you take those projects out, Madam Speaker, and I challenge any one of them to stand up and call one project of note that they brought to this country during the last 4 3/4 years. So that the point I'm making here is that the Antigua Labour Party can rightfully claim that we had a part to play in whatever economic successes were achieved during that period. And we recognize too that there was a spike in economic growth during that period because of Cricket World Cup. There's no doubt about it. Now today, in 2009, Madam Speaker, projected growth is in the region of 3%. So if it is that they were doing something really exciting that was creating all this economic growth and development, then evidently you would have seen it reflecting in the rate of growth in 2007, 2008, and 2009. The reality is, Madam Speaker, since 2006, the country's economy has been on a downward spiral. So 12%, according to them, that I necessarily buy into that, because even the IMF was very critical of the statistical office and said that they cannot rely on the reliability of the stats coming out of the government's statistical office. But give them the 12%, Madam Speaker. You have a situation in which there has been a downward spiral from 12% down to 8%, down to 7%, down to 6%, and now 3% this year, Madam Speaker. So evidently, they did not do anything special. It was due to the exogenous factor of having Cricket World Cup. People were building in anticipation. And many of the individuals, Madam Speaker, who built their little guest houses, well, them are still empty. In fact, we are so lucky that we have the medical school here. And let me also state here, yet another Labour Party project. Madam Speaker, it is Dr. Joseph John who brought that medical school here on the Labour. And if it wasn't for that school, many of those so-called hotel rooms that they counted as part of the room stock would have remained empty today. And let me tell you, that medical school, I'm sure right now, is contributing maybe up to 5% of GDP. Thanks to Labour. So, you'll get a chance to speak, and when you speak, you stand up and call one single project of note that the UPP government brought to this country during the last 4 3/4 years. You'll have your chance to speak. Madam Speaker, when you look at the whole issue of economic growth and development, again assuming that there was strong economic growth, there isn't a corresponding level of development. Because on the other hand, whereas there's economic growth, the poverty gap is actually widening, Madam Speaker. The poverty level is rising, so that today, poverty levels now stand at about 20% in this country. And that is why you have so much crime in this country, Madam Speaker. Yesterday, a young man came to my home, came in the morning, asked for some money, didn't have any money, Madam Speaker. Came back in the afternoon, still at home, because you know it's election time, a lot of traffic, didn't get a chance to go to the bank. A few hours later, I had a call from the police station, got locked up for breaking into somebody's home. Things are hard in this country. Now, I'm not justifying him breaking into anyone's home, but I just want you to understand the kind of desperation that exists in this country today under the UPP. Sometimes I wonder, where do they live? Madam Speaker, if you do a poll today, most people will tell you that they are worse off today than they were 4 3/4 years ago. When I stood up in this honorable house about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, Madam Speaker, and I said to the honorable member for Rollies that prices were rising, he refuted it. In fact, I brought my little basket and he brought one too. But the reality is today that the savings that they tried to create by introducing certain measures, by cutting the CST and by exempting certain goods, those savings are not being passed on to consumers. As a result, prices are extremely high. The same purity flour, for instance, that he brought here, the 2 kgs, that pack of flour today, Madam Speaker, has increased by about 58%, notwithstanding the fact that there's probably no CST to be paid on it, and notwithstanding the fact that it is zero rated. That is the reality of what is happening. And I'll give you one of our manifesto things. I'll tip you off. I'll tell you how we will deal with that. We will widen, Madam Speaker, the amount of goods that fall under price control to make sure that whatever savings should indeed go to the consumer actually reaches the consumer. And it's not that we believe in price control mechanisms, but you have an extraordinary situation, Madam Speaker, global situation, a lot of global pressures in terms of increase in prices and so on. And we want to make sure that our people can live comfortably by using certain strategies to reduce prices. And Madam Speaker, the increase in taxation, whereas there was some need to increase taxes, and we understand you can't run a country without taxes, we believe that the increase was too draconian. In essence, the UPP would have actually increased taxes by 100% in one term. And that's unheard of, Madam Speaker. I guarantee you, you can't find any government, developing or developed country in the world, on this planet, Madam Speaker, that would have doubled taxes in 5 years. Let me repeat that.